Well, surprise, surprise, you'll probably see sitting on the screen, sipping his coffee or tea or some concoction, Paul Beckwith, the wonderful Paul Beckwith. There we go. What is it, Paul? It's Equator something. Equator what? Coffee?
Equator Coffee Roasters.
Well, there's a lot to be said about the equator these days, Paul. Maybe you can tell us a bit like that later. So, welcome to Extinction Radio, Paul.
Hello, how are you doing?
I'm doing fine.
Good.
Do you know what that means? But we'll let other people.
Yes, I know what fine means. Something, neurotic is the N, I think, and emotional is the E.
Your memory's failing you, Paul. You know, I don't like this. You're one of our best scientists. Your memory's going. It's fucked up, insecure, neurotic, and emotionally unstable.
Right.
So I'm kind of in between. I go in and out, as probably you do with your emotions. But
I thought you were a stable genius.
A stable genius.
Yes.
Emotionally unstable genius or stable genius.
No. Are you a stable genius like the Donald?
Oh, right. Yeah, the Donald. Yes. Yeah. No, I think I would put myself in an unstable genius category if he's stable.
Well,
you know, because I'm opposite to whatever the Donald is. So, Paul, delighted to have you on the show, and it's video now. I don't know if you approve of that or not, if you think that's a good idea.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea.
Right, but we're keeping the name Extinction Radio because that's what we're known as, and it's a bit of a misnomer in a sense, but hey, we're keeping it anyway. So we've gone video, and I was wondering, well, Happy New Year to you for a start. I hope things are going well this year. And on that note, I was wondering if you could just give us a little summary of how you think 2017 progressed or digressed from in terms of climate change, biodiversity, habitat destruction, the whole caboodle, the Trump or whatever, the Trump. And then give us a look forward to maybe 2018 and your most optimistic and pessimistic views for 2018, mate.
Okay, well, you've covered quite a lot of different things in your question. Are you going to be talking again in this interview, or do I get an hour to elaborate on this question?
Well, if I get bored or something I want to comment on something, Paul, I will interject. You know.
Oh yes, I know you will. So
right. Let's yeah.
Yeah. So we're getting time compression here, right? I used to play a lot of duplicate bridge, and you bid and you try to make tricks, and if you mess up and you don't get as many tricks, my friend used to call it trick compression. He's trying to get 9 tricks and he gets 6 or 7, so trick compression. So we're getting time compression, right? You can take all of the climate projections about, things are going to get pretty bad somewhere down the line in the future. It used to be 2100, and then it's 2070 and 2050, and lo and behold, all this stuff is happening right now in front of our very eyes. We're very privileged to be on this planet as we see things falling apart completely. So, I think the hurricanes that went through the Caribbean are in a lot of people's minds, especially if you lived or visited any of those islands at any time. Puerto Rico. Look at that. How long ago was that now? 3 months ago, we still have over 1 million people without power. We have many, many people without potable water. They have to travel far distances to get drinking water. I mean, imagine, people complain when the power goes off for a day or even a few hours. If it's in a big major city, it's crazy. So, this is happening there. So we're seeing abrupt climate change proceeding, and we're seeing weaker countries, maybe random countries, wherever the storms happen to hit. Like I've talked about the climate casino. So if you're in a region that gets hit, your city gets submerged or hit by, some event, and it's costing more and more to recover from these things. a report just came out today summarizing Hurricane Harvey, I guess, and the damages from Harvey have only been exceeded by Katrina in the past. So the costs in you know, they're like 370 billion for 2017. So 2018, we're already starting off with things like this happening. You know, one of the things recently is Cape Town, 3.7 million people. Basically, day zero is when the taps no longer supply water. That's being moved up to April 12th. It was the 21st. Just drought going, you know, the worst drought they've had in a couple, 100 years, maybe 300 years. And they're building desalination plants like crazy, 3 or 4 of them. They're all behind schedule. Basically, the population's restricted, I think, to 87 liters per person, and that's going to be enforced to 50 liters. But most people aren't abiding by that. It's voluntary. There's a lot of water hoarding going on. So stuff is happening around the world in different locations. It's really bad stuff due to climate change, and we're just going to see more and more and more of it. It's not like the whole system collapses overnight. You know, it's not like it's a progression where you know, you lose in the climate casino, or your country that doesn't have enough resources to repair what the damage is. So
right. So you think then, Paul, that there's no real chance of a 50 gigaton burp of methane coming up, and it all being pretty quick?
Well, that is a risk, and that is a risk that is getting higher and higher. So the way I see this playing out in the next few years is I fully expect to have a blue ocean event, you know, within the next 5 years, maybe even in the next 3 years by 2020. If it happens, say, in 2020, you know, no sea ice for a couple of weeks at the end of the melt season in September in the Arctic. You know, we're saying no sea ice, maybe a little bit around the edges. We see the seasons. I'll be doing an extensive video on the Arctic, probably filming it later today, actually, and posting it in a day or two, probably tomorrow. I see when that happens, within a few years, probably no sea ice extended out for a few months, so maybe August, September, October, and then, you know, within a few more years, add another month, no sea ice for July, August, September, October, November, and then, you know, we're heading really to no sea ice year round. And then what happens? Well, the Arctic warms like crazy. There's no longer a cold pole, really. Where's the coldness going to be? It's going to be over Greenland, right? Greenland, high altitude, still lots of ice, lots of reflection. That'll be the colder area. So essentially, we're going to get a shift, right? The cold Arctic will no longer be the Arctic over the Arctic Ocean, over the North Pole. The cold Arctic will be over Greenland. So that obviously will shift the entire circulation patterns. It'll affect the Rossby way, the jet streams, of course. It'll act like, you know, the poles will be Antarctica and over Greenland. Some people call the third pole over the Tibetan Plateau. And then what will happen is Greenland ice melt rates greatly accelerate and Greenland darkens, then we'll lose even the Greenland part of the pole. Of course, sea levels will skyrocket. And, you know, we're basically rewiring the way heat is transported on the planet. We're rewiring the atmospheric circulation systems. We're rewiring the ocean circulation systems. And this will change weather everywhere on the planet, not just in the Northern Hemisphere. And of course, so water, I've already talked about, is a key issue. We need water. It's already, you know, we're getting huge droughts in all kinds of different areas. Cape Town is just the latest. You know, we've had droughts in Syria, which caused mass migration, droughts in California, droughts in Yemen. Look what's happening there now, all over. And they're hitting new areas. We're going to have a much different world. We've still got to grow food, right? So we're near the equator. Once we get the poles, the ice gone mostly, then all that heat goes into not melting ice, right? Where you melt ice, the temperature stays at 0. You heat up seawater, there's no ice. All that heat goes up into heating up the water and heating up the atmosphere. regions around the pole, the equator, are going to get so hot that they reach wet bulb temperature, and people are going to have to migrate away from the equator because you won't be able to be outside and survive.
Right. Yeah, it's well, everything you said is pretty worrying, Paul.
You can't worry. What does worrying do? Right?
Sorry.
What does worrying do?
What does worrying do? Yeah, well, it is kind of worrying if you've got kids, and you know what I mean, mate. You know.
No, I know, but you know, it's yeah.
just,
I mean, don't worry, because at that point, governments around the world, they'll say, "Hey, this Beckwith has called this all along," right? They'll let me get my grubby hands on those switches, right, to turn on those machines to suck CO2.
yes, I saw your little fancy water vapor machines.
And to turn on those machines to cool the planet and restore stability to the planet.
But I wanted to ask you something, Paul.
And we all live happily ever after, right? So
yeah, okay. But you said that we'll have an Arctic, year-long Arctic free ice, and then the cold will move down to Greenland, and eventually, Greenland will, will lose its ice, the seas will rise and stuff. Is this meaning that I'm going to get really cold here in Scotland, and you're going to get pretty cold in Canada for a while? And it's going to keep. How far south is this going to go?
Well, see, we've got a lot of factors here, and we're learning more and more about these different factors, but we're never going to learn everything. There'll always be the surprises, lots of surprises. I mean, the unknown unknowns and the unknown knowns and known unknowns and all this stuff from, what was this, Rumsfeld stuff? Cheney, Rumsfeld stuff. Cheney hasn't had a heartbeat since 2010. Did you know that?
He hasn't had a heartbeat.
Like he when you get an artificial heart,
of course,
artificial hearts were pulsing, so you had a beat. But now they just pump blood continuously, so you don't actually have a pulse when you have an artificial heart now. I didn't know that. I just read it on The Economist. Sorry, it's a bit off track, but anyway.
It's a bit off track, but maybe the same will apply to the Earth, soon before we know it,
But don't cut it out, man. It's important. It's important to know. I read it in The Economist just yesterday. This latest Economist. So the point about the point is okay. A number of different things we know are going to happen for sure. We don't know the exact timing, and so we know that when we lose the Arctic sea ice, it's going to really affect the zones of the ocean up in the high Arctic, where the seawater, the Gulf Stream, comes across, moves up towards the north, cools down. That very salty, cold water then is much heavier than the fresh water from the ice melt, so it sinks down, and we get this global ocean circulation. So what we know is that the Gulf Stream location will shift, and the water won't cool down as much as it's going to the north, because we've got this fresh water cap on the surface, which is colder, so it'll disrupt the descent. And we're talking about the AMOC, the Atlantic Meridional Ocean Circulation, shutting off or redistributing. Instead of going so far north, we might get this water descent further south. So what this will do, you'll get colder in Scotland. You'll get colder in Europe, and it can happen quickly if the AMOC shuts quickly. We'll also get a bit colder on the east coast of Canada. And then this thing will be rewired. The heat process has changed. But then as we continue to get a much hotter northern hemisphere overall, much less temperature difference between the equator areas and the pole, the Arctic's going to warm like crazy. I mean, we know in the past the Arctic temperature didn't drop below zero, for example, in the high Arctic, because things that would die if it dropped below zero survive. We have the fossil record showing they're there, so we can get that sort of thing. So I guess the point is, at what point with all this warming do we get release of methane? I mean, we're going to get a continuous release increasing over time from the permafrost that's on the land. Okay, as temperature rises, then we'll get a correspondingly increase of methane from there. Now, the methane that's in the clathrates or hydrates on the seafloor, those will come out more episodically as bursts. Will we get a ramping up and and 50 gigatons was in the study by that Peter Waddens was involved in. Will it come out? I think they modeled two things. They looked at a 50 gigaton burst in a year and modeled it out 10 years, or they looked at a 5 gigaton release per year over 10 years and looked at the warming in both cases. So, that the risk of that is higher and higher, and that will complete the process, if you like, of bringing us to a totally, warmer Arctic, probably permanently. Now, this is the ghost of Christmas future talking to you, right? The ghost of climate future talking to you, right? It's not set in stone that these things will happen, right? If we continue on our path of stupidity, then these things will happen. But humans are the biggest feedback in the entire system, right? If we get off our butts and get concerned about this and say we have a climate emergency, we really don't want this to happen because we built civilization for the climate that we have now, we haven't designed it for massive changes, then I think we have a good shot at having a different future, right? As happened with as happened with Ebenezer Scrooge in A Christmas Carol, that timeless classic. He saw the visions from the ghost of Christmas future, the ghost of climate future. If enough people see that, then we can change what we do, take emergency action, and have a different future.
So when the shit hits the fan, Paul, and the politicians and the funders and the general public and everybody accepts that the shit has seriously hit the fan, I take it what you plan to have in place right there then is something which is scalable, upable in terms of carbon capture, and geoengineering is ready to put in place immediately. Is that right?
Well, there are things that we can do very, very rapidly to cool the planet, right? We know they work. There's a lot of moral discussions on, do we want to do it and stuff, but those discussions invariably don't consider the risks of not doing it. They just consider saying, oh, if we do it, maybe we'll cause a drought somewhere, or maybe some country will complain, or maybe this will happen or that'll happen. Well, if we don't do it, and we may lose our food supply and our water supply and have, huge parts of the population culled, just dying off, not enough food grown, not enough water, etc. Huge, we're talking, huge percentages of the population. So the risks of doing nothing are not really tenable. And the problem is we're just waiting so damn long that the system seems to be destabilizing so quickly. We're just losing control, maybe losing the capability of doing very much at all, except for these, very radical, very intense things. Like, for example, like if the system destabilizes, we start getting some more methane coming up and temperature jumps a degree. In the last 3 years, temperature's gone up 0.24 degrees, which is phenomenal rate of change of increase in temperature. There was a strong El Nino year, but still, after other El Ninos, the temperature normally drops off a bit more, and it's not doing that anymore. We're losing the thread. Politicians fool themselves, policymakers fool themselves. They have no idea, how bad things are. And I just, even scientists, the scientists don't either. I was just at the AGU conference, 24,000 scientists. I walk around, hey, this is a neat poster. Wow, this is happening. There's no sense of urgency yet amongst those people. So it means they just don't understand how bad it is.
Yeah, I saw your video, Paul, where you're at that conference wandering about, and you're looking for something specifically. I think it was Arctic or something you were looking for. I'm not quite sure. But I did see your video, and I recommend everybody go and watch Paul's videos on YouTube, Paul Beckwith's channel on YouTube, because he's got some fantastically educational videos up there on YouTube. I saw that video, but I'd say on a scale of, let's just say 1 to 10, Paul, how hopeful are you that, when the shit hits the fan, that there will be something in place to capture what a lot of people are saying is just a ridiculous amount of carbon that we have to capture from the air, and it's totally unscalable. You know, you cannot scale it up. So, what is your hope from what?
Okay, so yeah, so it's gonna the only thing that is really scalable for capturing carbon that I see is a massive, you know, we're landlubbers. We just think of doing stuff on land. I mean, the IPCC, they assume for the RCP, representative concentration pathway 2.6, which is like the lowest emission scenario, that we capture carbon on land using something called bioenergy, carbon capture and storage, BECCS, BECCS. That's, forget it. We don't have enough land to do that. We'd be displacing crop growth. Notice they never talk about population growth. But anyway, that aside, we got to use the oceans, man. I mean, the oceans absorb loads of carbon. We just have to make them absorb loads more. So we can capture huge amounts of carbon very quickly in the ocean, no problem at all. You know, we just need to provide the ocean with the nutrients that are missing in order to stimulate phytoplankton growth, and then the entire food chain in the oceans will proliferate. So, you know, the oceans are basically a desert for phytoplankton. It's only near the shores where there's upwelling, where there's nutrients, that we get huge growth. But we can actually turn the desert areas of the ocean into phytoplankton blooms. And, you know, we have ships transporting goods all across the ocean. Okay, all we do is have these ships release slowly on their path around the ocean, their normal routes, some nutrients to support phytoplankton growth, and that will suck huge amounts of carbon from the atmosphere. But you know what? It's gonna, I mean, a drought, you know, that causes global shortages of drinking water, or crop failure, that's gonna happen in a season, right? And spread for a couple of years. So you know, we can quickly start pulling carbon out of the atmosphere and the oceans, but it's still going to take some time. So this is why we need to, you know, we just need to retrofit some of these big, huge aircraft, fueling tankers with materials to, you know, put a little reflective canopy up in the stratosphere to cool the planet at about 1 degree or half a degree. You know, we can tailor it. We can start putting stuff in the stratosphere, cool 0.2 degrees, 0.5 degrees, you know, 0.8 degree, 1 degree, bring us back down to the sort of level of temperature that we're used to, and that will allow us to deploy these systems to suck carbon out of the atmosphere. So,
right, Paul.
I'm just saying, you know, talk about the ethics, talk about whatever you want, but
yeah,
it's saying my crystal ball is telling me that all these things are going to happen. You know, talk all you want. You know, we're just not doing anything now. We're heading to this, and that's how it's going to play out. You know, how many years it takes, that depends on how quickly the sea ice goes. Depends on how much methane comes up. All these other things happen. So there you go.
Yeah, you're breaking up a little bit, Paul. There, can you move slightly closer to the microphone?
There you go.
Hello. Sorry, viewers, if something funny happened there for a few seconds. We had a little technical difficulty, as I imagine Paul might have with some of his ideas. But that's I shouldn't really be saying that, Paul, because I really don't want to have an argument with you about this.
No, I agree with you. Yeah.
Yeah. So, where are you going to get these nutrients from for spreading around the ocean? That's my first question for you.
Yeah. Where am I going to get the nutrients from? They're in the soils, right? For one thing. So you could just grab a handful of dirt and just chuck it over on the ocean, right? And all the nutrients will come out of the dirt, but you might lose all your soil, so this could be a problem, maybe not the best solution. I highly recommend a book by this gentleman by the name of Joe Quirk. That's his real name. It's not a
spell?
trade name.
Could you spell that?
Quirk, Q-U-I-R-K.
Quirk.
Joe Quirk. Yeah,
Right.
the book is called Seasteading. S-E-A steading, as opposed to homesteading you do on the land. Seasteading you do on the ocean. And you get the nutrients are things just simple like iron, for example. You know, little like iron powder, right? There's stuff that's plentiful. You know, you go to you some of the you take some of the iron from an iron mine and you just grind it up into very small particles, and you just kind of you can embed them in something that floats. That's the best way of doing it, because then it floats around, and over time some of the iron's released over the space of a year or two. Like embed corn husks is one idea, or something, some bio feed thing that we don't use right now, and these things would float around the ocean, slowly releasing nutrients, causing phytoplankton blooms everywhere. There's other things too, but you know, again, this isn't rocket science, right? And should humans do this? Well, you know, we've messed up the atmosphere and ocean chemistry for 150 years. You know, if we try to do something to restore what it was like before, you know, I mean, think if we restored the biomass, the fish and the plants in the ocean to what they were like 150 years ago. You know, there are certain areas where you could almost walk on top of the water. There were so many fish swimming in the water, right? That's how islanders described it in some of the regions where there was upwelling. They said, hey, you could really, like, literally, you look at the ocean and you see these fish are like swimming up, and you see the water sort of shimmering, and it's just laden with biomass. And think of all the carbon that would be in that alone, right? So
that sounds like a paradise scenario to me, Paul. Which, you know.
Oh yeah. I mean, do it.
I wish you all the best with me. I really do. But you know, as I said, I'm not wanting to. I just want to get you involved here in what you believe, and let the listeners make up their own mind. So I don't really want to get into back and forth scenario. Does Peter Wadham's go along with this? With the filling the oceans with iron particles?
He's more. There's a guy, Seb Clark, in Australia, who's an inventor, and he's working with a guy, teacher in the UK by the name of Kevin Lister, and there's a group called Envisionation, with the website Envisionation, and those are some of the ideas, you know, of ways of seeding the ocean with nutrients. There's also ideas on creating, brightening low-level clouds over the ocean, marine cloud brightening. There's also ideas on restoring ice in the Arctic Ocean so that we have a white reflective surface instead of you know, open ocean that's very dark. There's ideas on that. There's also a group called the Healthy Climate Alliance that is working on a lot of these different ideas. There's also a group I met at the AGU conference, this mostly, where is it, Cambridge or Harvard? Harvard, I think. A group 911ice.org or something, like it's emergency, you know, 911, 911, but 911org.ice, something like that. And they have these different ideas for thickening ice. You know, there's about a dozen companies that are looking at direct air capture to, like, basically making machines that suck CO2 out of the atmosphere. You know, I think trees work better personally. But, you know, the problem is that our climate is warming and changing so much that we're getting drying and, you know, stress on trees, and then we're getting these massive wildfires, and they're going further and further up north. We've even seen some wildfires, some of the tundra burning in Greenland. You know, just look on Earth Null School, just Google that and click on chemistry, you know, and look at things like SO2X, the NOx's, and see, and go around. You can see where the big cities are spewing out crap. You can see look in the far north, and you can see hotspots, which are from burning fires, etc. And the problem is we're losing our carbon sinks on the planet rapidly. The forests are getting
And Paul, if I may interject just for a second, what happens if there's obviously a whole scenario of things here which are being investigated at the moment. But what happens should civilization have a big financial collapse, and then civilization starts to collapse all over the place, and we get our global dimming coming back down on us. I mean, what do you think about that, mate? That scenario?
Yeah, well, that's not very good, right?
No.
I mean, what happens is well, first of all, generally, I'm arguing that that most of the collapses are they're processes, right? They're not instant. So weaker countries have financial collapse, and then right, it doesn't happen simultaneously around the world. Where like Puerto Rico is already hit, that's part of the U.S. and they're just not rebuilding it. Maybe if the hurricane season's bad again and it goes through and destroys all of the destroyed buildings and little feeble infrastructure that they've managed to build in the intervening year, I mean, it's just like people won't live there, right? I mean, people will.
Okay, but I mean, so, we're talking about it being a process, right?
A process. So
process.
I guess
what if, Paul? What if the Chinese economy or the American economy totally collapses? Let's talk about a big economy here.
Well, we came close to that. We came close to a complete collapse a few years back, right? 2008, 2009. Then people will. There'll be a lot less world trade. There'll be a lot more, local stuff, local food growing, local communities getting together saying, hey, we're scared, we're really scared. We got to do something here and try to survive. So people learning skills and, consumerism would stop, right? And this is a good thing. We don't need to all new stuff all the time. It would, the internet maybe would stop working. I mean, that would do in half the population probably. How are they going to survive without?
I'm wondering that myself. But
right, so
we're talking about that, Paul. But my main question really did not focus on like suddenly people being able to grow their own food and stuff on a large scale at local level. Really what it concentrated on was if there was a big financial collapse and a big civilization collapse which affected a lot of the world very quickly, how would that then, the lack of global dimming, affect the planet, and how quickly?
Okay. So a collapse first. So I'll directly answer your question. So a collapse of financial systems globally will devastate the rich Western countries because they won't be able to deal. Will it devastate a place like Cuba? No, right? They've had sanctions, they have power interruptions, they've become much more self-sufficient. So we're in deep trouble, but there are places, there are islands that are much more resilient. There's poor countries that they've been used to hardships like this their entire life. Nothing changes too much for them. Okay, so that's one thing. So the collapse will affect countries disproportionately, and we're at the worst end of the stick, being in developed, so-called advanced countries. Now, as far as global dimming goes, there was a paper recently, which I should cover in a video and haven't yet, and it looked at, what is the number of global dimming? Is it half a degree? Is it a degree? Is it 2 degrees? Is it 4 degrees? And the number is in the range up to about a degree or so. So maybe half a degree to a full degree that's the best scientific view right now on that. Something like that we can correct that will happen very, very quickly, right? Right when the collapse occurs. We can actually correct for that rise of temperature, half a degree to a degree, with a well-known amount of sulfur in the stratosphere.
Right.
Okay, because the volcano puts X amount of sulfur in the stratosphere, cools the planet for 3 years, maybe half a degree or 3/4 of a degree or a degree, depends on how much we put up. And we can just figure out how much to put up there and correct for that through that
Right.
method. Not ideal, but it would be done to preserve our access to food and water.
Right. And would I take it you're talking about putting this up into the whole atmosphere of the whole world?
Yeah,
Are you?
right. Sure.
Yeah. So you know, is it do you see any negative effects of this affecting one country more than another country? Or is it just going to be a straightforward process? You know, could it affect one country in a really bad way, like, you know, or are there too many unknowns here that we really don't know if this technology is going to work?
See, one of the problems is that it's very difficult to gauge. We can't do experiments on the planet, right? We can't say, okay, we've got a parallel planet. On one planet, we do nothing, and we watch the food supply and water supply collapse and mass starvation and wars everywhere and total chaos. You know, on another planet, okay, so industry collapses with the financial collapse, and we put the sulfur in, and most of the planet is okay. We get by, but some countries get devastated, right? Of course, those countries will blame everything on the sulfur, even though they would have been devastated even worse or more without any sulfur going into the atmosphere, right? The problem is, like, this is a problem with vaccines, right? For flu. Lots of people take vaccines for flu each year. And if you don't get flu, okay, well, great. I mean, did it have anything to do with the vaccine? Maybe not, maybe it did. But one thing's for sure, if you take the vaccine and it doesn't cover the type of strain, flu is mutating so quickly, and you get flu, you'll say this vaccine is useless, right? It's always all or nothing. Things are always more complicated than this. I mean, is it worth taking the flu vaccine? Well, in 1918 in Kansas, okay, the H1N1 flu virus appeared. By winter of 1919, a third of the entire global population had the flu, and 50 million people were dead. Okay, this virus mutates, and there were some outbreaks since then. You know, in various years, 3 or 4 years were very bad. You know, and they were all related to the H1N1 strain in 1918, but they didn't kill people as much. Maybe people were a bit healthier. So if this sort of thing happens again, you know, we have vaccines that can keep us healthier and safer. But you know, they're working on vaccines that are where you get it maybe once every 5 or 10 years. Or what if you have a vaccine that you give to a kid and it protects them from the flu for their life, right? The point is, you know, after time, you might say, well, we don't need the vaccine because we never, like, when a technology is successful, people don't care about it, they don't think about it, it works, they're all happy, they forget about it. You know, it's when the really bad stuff happens that you look for ways to solutions. So this is always a problem with technology, right? If we go and, you know, the world's falling apart, we have a financial collapse, we have a global dimming, we put sulfur up, corrects for the temperature, everything hums along again, right? Then we say, well, you know, like we forget about the stuff. We forget about how dire it is. We forget that maybe we would have all gone under completely without doing anything. I mean, it's just the way humans are, right? It's the way our mind works.
Right. Yeah. But we are talking in this instance of, like, I think, as you've mentioned before, every country, if you go for carbon capture, and possibly you need agreements from every country.
So see,
you know,
that's the thing. I don't think that's gonna happen, really. I think what's gonna happen is the rich and powerful countries will. I mean, you just need some billionaire to say, heck, you know, let's just go and do this, right? And they'll just go and do it. Who's going to stop him right now? Or you say that maybe the situation globally will get so serious that all countries are panicking. So we give more power to a sort of a body which does the best they can for the world, right? And they say, well, this is what we're going to do, and they do it. And you tend to lose choice, and you lose democracy, and you lose all these things in times of great stress on country. So this is one of the problems that is happening right now. Democracy is on its way out. So imagine if we had a Trump-like character who was scared completely of climate change, taking out, make the world great again, right? Recognizes all of these things, and what's to stop them from deploying it? So the anti-Trump, might be trying to cool the planet right now.
Right. Well, yeah.
Right. So are we going to say the planet revolves around one guy right now, right?
Right. There might be, but for me, the fossil fuel companies and there seem to be a lot of new drilling expeditions going on. There's new lack of subsidies. Subsidies have been withdrawn for solar, for instance. I don't believe that renewables are scalable up.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, but we know who runs the world right now, right?
I'm not sure. I'm sure Putin's got something to do with it. But anyway, let's and China as well. But let's. I just want to move tack slightly here to methane. And there's a report that that's been up and been talked about recently. There's a small bunch of scientists that are saying, you don't have to worry about this methane. This methane is all going to get eaten by bacteria. Well, what do you think about that one, Paul? Have you seen that report?
Yeah, I have, and it's similar to a report I did a few videos on, I guess a while back.
Yeah.
And the problem is, are you talking about methane from these seafloor sediments? Or you're right, I think you are.
I think I might be. I'm not 100% sure, Paul, but it's a small group of scientists and somewhere in Alaska.
Right. So you're talking about that group, and they're saying, there's enough microbes and things in these sediments that they'll decompose all the methane. The problem, this is happening if methane is leaking out slowly and stuff, but we know that doesn't happen everywhere, and that one of these things, the ideas of these methane bursts, is you got to get a huge amount of methane released from the melted ice cages that surround the methane. You get the expansion of 160 times in volume. There's cracks. We know that the Earth isn't completely uniform, and it's not just a diffusion thing. The methane can find a path up from deep in the sediments to the ocean water, and it completely saturates all of the microbes and stuff that are there. It's just coming out too fast and furious that it just saturates everything that might destroy it, and that takes out the initial part of the methane that comes up, and then the rest of it just comes up, and there's nothing left to remove it, and you get a big pulse of methane. So I don't know, what those scientists are smoking, quite honestly. Like seriously, are they Canadian? Are they in a place where pot's being legalized already or something? Or what are they been drinking? Or science. One of the things is it's usually very. Science is a progression, an iterative process. You learn something, it's published, bit more. Everything there is pointing out to methane is a huge problem. You get a few people saying, hey, now methane isn't. Now, we're not saying that they're wrong, but lots more studies will be done, and then they'll either throw this stuff out, there was a flaw in their reporting, or we go back to this path of it's a huge problem, or they made some sort of breakthrough, found something that nobody else recognized. But it's in all likelihood, we're going to get a large methane pulses. You can feel better and believe that study if you want, but it's not. Really...
It's just some kind of rogue study, you think, to take the emphasis off what is really happening, because Peter Wadhams has been through. He's seen he's seen funnels of methane. You know, you got the Shakova and Somalatop, where
Yes.
it's got lots of evidence that it's coming up.
Yes,
You know?
he has. I mean, one of the things that I'm doing is I'm going to try to travel a bit more this year. So I'm doing, you know, I tried to raise some money with my donate button, and it was successful to go to pay for most of my trip, not all of it, to
Excellent.
the AGU in New Orleans. This year, there's lots of conferences going on, and you know, one of the things I'd like to do is find a decent conference in London, England, and go out there and, you know, meet Kevin Lister and meet Peter Wadhams and
Hey, you can even meet
you know,
people.
talk to people, you know, some of the AMEG colleagues that I've been working with for 5 or 6 years, but have never met in person.
So you're not planning to meet me, Paul?
And, well, I could come out to
Hey, we could go
my mom
Finkel's
is
Cave.
from, if you're near Bonnie Bridge, I could probably
Yes.
swing by.
I'm near Bonnie
My mom's from Bonnie Bridge, which nobody has heard of. You know, probably like 20 people, a little town in the Scottish.
Yeah, well, we've all heard of it, and it's quite near me, and I've got spare bedrooms, so we could actually, you know, you could come up here and we could have a real go at each other.
Yeah, we can do a live session.
Yes,
right?
that would actually be wonderful.
Yes.
The second thing I wanted to bring up was that, about permafrost melting, and there've been a report I read today about, you know, there's no need to worry about old viruses coming back up, and anthrax that was going to come up anyway, and that happens, and, you know, there's no need to worry about all these things because all these things are dead, and there are scientists who've taken, you know, bits of dead bodies and bits of dead animals and gone to the labs with them and tried to put them in the petri dishes and whatever, and tried to, you know, what's the word I'm looking for?
Try to get them to, well, revive them, have them multiply.
To grow, yeah, to multiply, yeah. Do you think that is probably the case, Paul, or do we have a worry here with the permafrost melting and diseases and all that stuff happening?
I don't think it's the case. Things when we you know, when the moon program was going on, some of these probes were landing on the moon, and then they lose power and they sit there. So there were some probes in the early 60s that landed on the moon, and you know, they had cameras and stuff. And one of the moonwalks in the late 60s, so like 5, 6, 7, 8 years later, went near one of these old probes, and they studied some. They got some of the equipment from these probes, and from some of the cameras, they found this bacteria. And at first, they thought, "Oh my God, there's like life on the moon here," but it was actually on the camera when it was sent up originally, and it survived,
Right.
and then it was revived. So life has a way, as you know. Just watch Jurassic Park. Like, life has a way. So there's lots of things that go dormant and just can sit there for long periods of time, you know, dormant. They're not multiplying. It's cold, and then when the conditions are right, they come alive. I mean, think about like how do fruit flies appear in a completely sealed house, for example? Where do they come from? Suddenly it's warm enough and they're all over in your kitchen, right? For example, you know, like what do they do? Are they little eggs somewhere? Or, you know, that's probably maybe not the best example, but yeah, but see, on the other hand, our medicines and our technologies are much better, and people are much healthier now than they were, you know, in World War I times. People were shorter in World War I. They were much thinner, right? Food, nutrition, we didn't know as much about. The medicine was archaic compared to now. So, you know, although these things may pop up and appear, our medical systems are probably good enough to, you know, stop most of them being like, you know, knocking off 50 million people or whatever, like the 1918 flu epidemic.
Right. Okay. That's interesting. To have your view on that one. I just want to take a step back here and go back to what you were talking about, the Arctic and Greenland and the cold coming down. I think you call it the AMOC. I think that's the same as the Gulf Stream, isn't it?
Well, the AMOC is the Atlantic Meridional
Right.
overturning
It's the other one,
circulation.
the
Some
Gulf
people
Stream.
just say MOC, which is meridional overturning circulation. The Gulf Stream is the part of that that flows along the surface, basically. And in the Pacific, it's a Kuroshio current, which flows north off the east coast of Japan. That's the Pacific.
Right. So is there going to be a battle between this cold, which is coming south, and the warmth, which is going north? And is, you know, assuming that methane and the planet is getting warmer, then the warmth that's coming north will end up beating the cold, which is coming south.
Yes, and see, this causes superstorms, right? I mean, the contrast, the huge temperature difference from the warm water coming north and the cold going south, or like if it's very close proximity, the hot and cold, you get a huge pressure imbalance, and that generates enormous winds, and you get these superstorms, and you could get trains of ocean waves, maybe like Hansen was talking about it in a paper, you know, these huge boulders being lifted up from the seafloor up high, like 30, 40 feet, you know, due to these trains of waves coming repeatedly. Not as soon, think of instead of a tsunami, instead of a tidal wave, you know, one massive wave, think of just a train of waves blown by the wind of these huge storms and things. So these sort of things, you know, we've got a lot of really cool stuff, you know, in store for us coming up. If you can survive it, right, it's going to be quite a ride. So there's a lot of things are happening very, very, very quickly, very, very fast. And
right, Paul. So can I ask you? Have you still secretly got your place booked on your nuclear submarine, just in case?
Yeah, I think that, well, see, we have a bunker in Ottawa called the Defen Bunker. Like it's basically buried in bedrock, and it was supposed to be where the Canadian government would go if there was a nuclear exchange. So during the Cold War, and it was sort of decommissioned, and now it's a museum, right? So every time I go visit the museum, I try to bring like a knapsack full of tinned goods and stuff, and I just stash them in a secret location in the museum. And you know, I'll just make sure I'm visiting the museum, and I'm on the inside rather than the outside when it's sealed off. I mean, several hundred people can live there, completely isolated from the air outside and stuff for several years. So
yeah, but you've got to beat that 199 other people, or 200.
Yeah, well, I'm just waiting. I'm waiting for it to go on sale, and then you know, I can be the climate advisor to the billionaires who get together and buy it, right? Just have to talk my way into a spot, right?
Yeah. Or indeed a nuclear submarine, you know.
Well, yeah, I guess, you know, it's...
keep you alive for a few more years anyway. I don't know what you come up to.
I mean, you know the nuclear submarine thing, right? I mean, that was like... you know, if somebody says that you know, I won't mention any names. If somebody says that every human is going to die in 10 years, and I can demonstrate that there's some humans that can be in a cave or in a nuclear submarine and they can not die in 10 years, then that invalidates the idea that we'll be extinct in 10 years, right? So it was just, you know, it was responding to a very sort of out there concept with another very out there concept. And then people forgot the rationale for me mentioning the nuclear submarine, right? And this happens occasionally. Like actually, when I talked about the anthropogenic Arctic volcano, right, as a metaphor for putting sulfur into the Arctic to cool the Arctic, some people actually thought I meant, well, he's talking about trying to trigger a volcano in the Arctic, in Greenland or whatever. And like, it's a metaphor, right? So I have to be a bit careful with metaphors. Also, I did a video explaining what nuclear winter was, and then I got accused of trying to advocate that, you know, we drop nuclear bombs in the desert to incinerate, you know, cool the planet. And I wasn't advocating that at all. I was just saying this, hey, this is what nuclear winter is. If this technology, if these things were detonated and they put enough dust and stuff into the atmosphere, then this is what would happen, right? So it's not like like I wasn't I mean, I'm advocating for carbon dioxide removal. I'm advocating for slashing fossil fuel emissions. I'm advocating for making sure we know how to cool the planet when we need to do that to preserve, food supply and water supply, right? Those are things I'm advocating for. I make it very clear when I advocate for something.
Yes, you do. You do indeed, Paul. You make it extremely clear. Actually, looking at you, you look very much like a good friend of mine here. I've just seen
A mad scientist, right?
his face in your face. Yeah, he's a bit of a climate scientist.
Well, hey, I mean,
Well,
I have half Scottish blood, right? So.
well, that might be it, Paul. You're one of the lucky few,
Yeah.
because we've got a whole system for surviving up here that you don't know about, but we're just going to keep that to ourselves, we've been the great innovators, the Scots are well known for being great innovators, so we're just keeping this one quiet and pretending that we're all going to go extinct soon. It's just
well, I think it has to do with haggis and wind farms, right? And you've got lots of wind up there. It's something to do with the bagpipes as well in the kilt.
It is, and as soon as you mention the bagpipes, Paul, your video goes off.
My video just went off again?
Yeah, and it just says Paul's iPhone. So I can still hear you. So maybe it'll magically come back on again.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on this time. Hey, if I was a conspiracy theorist, the deep state has hacked my phone and they don't want all this stuff going out to the world, right? So
yeah, maybe that's a good point to end it, Paul, because we've had a good wee shift here, mate.
Yes, we have, and I got to save my best stuff for the next interview, right?
yeah. You've got to, yes. No, I think that was some good stuff in there, Paul. So as usual, go to Paul Beckwith's videos on YouTube. If you want to know anything about the climate system, please go to Paul Beckwith's interviews on YouTube, where he explains everything pretty comprehensively in 15 minutes exactly. I still don't quite understand why you do that, Paul. Can you tell me why you do that?
Yeah, I just, me, I'd talk for hours. I got to have some way to end it. So I just leave the option where it doesn't let me upload, and it cuts me off at 15 when I upload, right? And if I change that to unlimited, then I gotta do other stuff too, not just do videos, right? So.
Yeah, but you could have an alarm clock goes off, and then you could finish up what you're saying rather than just sort of.
Yeah, no, but I'm talking about abrupt change. So if there's an abrupt end, you can figure out what I'm probably going to say, right? So.
Yeah, okay. I mean, you say most of the stuff in that 15 minutes anyway, and I'll just end off. I mean, you're not very happy with the deniers at the moment, are you?
Yeah, well, I mean, they're giving me lots of, they're like cannon fodder, right? So I'm not, yeah, I mean, it's a serious problem that we have, right? And I knew it was serious, and it sort of hit me recently that it's a lot worse even than I thought. So
yeah, and it's a serious. Maybe we can talk about that next time, Paul. So
yes.
Once again, an absolute pleasure having you with us here on Extinction Radio / video, and we'll have you on again soon, Paul. Thanks a lot.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Cheers, Paul. Bye, mate.
Okay, goodbye.
Bye.